I always have the urge to put this up to my mouth, but it doesn't make any sense because I can just put it on the table. Look at this. Now it's handheld. Hello and welcome to an unhaul. Woo 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 woo. Just kidding. I actually don't like the word unhaul. I'm a fan of the word declutter. I'm a fan of the word getting rid of. I'm a fan of the word I don't like this book, and so there's no reason for me to keep it up here when I already have to put more books down here because they don't fit. That's what we're doing today. We're getting rid of books today. And it's a good amount. Got this big box full and this bag full. So just gonna go through one by one. I've got a couple of categories here. I've got books that I have read, books that I've DNF'd, and books that I have not read. So let's go ahead and start with the books that I have not read just because I have the least opinion of those, and so they'll be quick. So, if you're wondering what I plan to do with these books once I get rid of them, the first step will be to try to sell them at a used bookshop near me that kind of does community buying, and then the rest will be given to little free libraries in my area. So, I am getting rid of 7 books that I haven't read, mostly for the reason of they just lost my interest since I acquired them. So there's no hard feelings, mostly. The first is Talking Man by John M. Broadhead. I actually picked this up at a little free library near my house for a different reading challenge that I'm doing on Storygraphs for a book that is published from your region or your area. And so this is published by a local Albuquerque author, and so that really helped me with the challenge. But the concept isn't super interesting to me, or at least seems kind of vague. All you really know is that this guy is on a space mission and there's other people he needs to figure something out with. I ended up picking up Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and he's from Santa Fe, and so that is good enough for me for this challenge, and I'm much more interested in reading that as opposed to this book that I don't really know anything about. There's not really community reviews. As much as I want to support a local author, I have too many books on my shelf that I'm interested in reading to read this kind of where another book could serve its purpose. I also have The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and I think that this book is interesting in the sense of it's like magical realism with books, but it is set in a historical setting, and it's quite long with itty bitty font, and I am never going to gravitate towards historical fiction. It's not my favorite thing, even though it has elements that I am interested in. I think that this book just isn't my thing, and again, there are too many books that I want to read, and even some that are historical but have more kind of pulling me into them than this one does. Okay, this might be a hot take, but I am getting rid of The Red Queen, and I have not read this. I DNF'd another one of Victoria Aveyard's books pretty recently, and it just kind of showed me that maybe she's not for me, and I didn't love it. I feel like maybe this series has a lot of nostalgia for people. It's one of these kind of YA fantasy romance series that I'm just maybe not the target audience for anymore, or the time has passed for me to enjoy it, and just am not excited to read it, so there's no point in me hanging on to it. I bought it used, and someone else will be excited to find this. I'm also getting rid of Ablutions by Patrick DeWitt. This is kind of a short, weird book about a bartender in LA who is trying to write a manuscript based on the patrons of this bar and ends up slipping into alcoholism himself. I used to be in this phase where all I wanted to read was like short, weird books like this, but a lot of them don't work for me, especially the ones written by men. I've noticed they tend to get a little bit too weird, or there's something Oedipal about them. It sounds strange, but that has occurred to me more than you would think should happen to any person. And so I think that the time has come for me to just get rid of this. I don't want to read it anymore. I don't need to read about a man slipping into alcoholism. It's not interesting to me. I'm not going to discuss other themes. It's just not for me. And lastly, of the books I have not read, I am getting rid of the whole Girl with the Dragon Tattoo original series. I wanted to read this at one point just because it was so popular, and people tend to like the first book a lot, but I don't want to start a series if the second two don't have great reviews, or if there's like a male main character who tends to just gravitate all of these women because he's just so sexy and so stunning. And that's kind of what I've heard about it lately. It's like kind of just a classic mystery written by a man, and maybe it's better than some of the other ones, but I think I'm not excited about it. Takes up a lot of room. I bought them for like 50 cents a piece. I'm okay just letting her go. All right, let's talk about the books that I have DNF'd. There are only two, at least that I'm getting rid of now. And the first is Realm Breaker by Victoria Aveyard, which is a stunning book and has all of the elements that you'd think that I would like. It's a high fantasy. There are a lot of characters, but they all seem to kind of interact or know each other in some way, and there's something going on that they need to solve. However, the problem I had with this book, I made it like 20 or 30% in like almost to page 200. The problem was I was so confused because you open with learning about every single character at once instead of kind of easing into it, as well as the chapters in here are quite long and there's at least 5 points of view, and so you don't get anywhere very quickly. I was really, really bored, and I read the reviews to see if I should keep going, being so bored and confused at the same time. And it just seemed like this book specifically leaves off on a cliffhanger. There's not much of a romance to it. I just think it was time for me to stop. I was like dreading reading this. It just wasn't for me. I wanted it to be because it's stunning, but someone else will be so happy to read it who is not me. Okay, this book is called Pussy Reclamation, and what I wanted this to be was about womanhood and independence and coming into your own and feeling comfortable in your own body, which is a topic that I am interested in, like women's presentation and sexual health and such. But this was just a middle-aged white woman cult, gross, icky vibes. I DNF'd it in the first chapter. In the introduction, which to be fair is written by someone who is not the author of this book. The author of this book is Regina Tomashauer. The intro is written by somebody else, one of her other sister goddess, that's what they call themselves, sister goddesses. And she was basically saying that, like, if you can just tap into the power of your, then you will no longer need SSRIs. I don't really know if that is sound science. And then it just really was just talking about sister goddesses and how you will no longer hate men if you are in your, like, I just don't. It was giving cult vibes, it was giving icky, it was just giving not for me, and so I will let that one go. Now, here are all the books that I have read that I'll be getting rid of. Kind of have these in no particular order. Mostly what it is with these books is I read them and I either liked them or disliked them, or even some that I really enjoyed but I don't really have that emotional connection to, or I just don't feel the need to keep them. Hello and welcome to my parents' guest room. I brought some books with me, or have finished some books while I've been here that I will not be taking back with me, so kind of change of scenery, brief intermission to go over them. Maybe go in chronological order here. So I started my whole journey home and up and down the West Coast this summer at my sister's house in San Diego and also my parents' house. And so the book that I read on the plane with me, I figured I would get rid of. So that's why I started it that day, and that is Beside Myself by Anne Morgan. I really enjoyed this book, actually. I gave it 4.5 stars. This is a book about two young girls who are twins who decide to switch places for a day, and one refuses to switch back, and the implications of that and what happens to the both of them as they age. This was really good, kind of a psychological thriller. I was hoping for kind of a big dramatic twist, and I didn't really get that, but the writing was really, really good and able to take on multiple perspectives, and I really just enjoyed reading it. It was very, very British, which I enjoy, but I brought it with me to kind of read and pass along. While I was here, I bought The Vegetarian by Han Kang, and I bought it at like a Friends of the Public Library in the Thousand Oaks Public Library, and I read it right away. To be fair, I think I confused this a little bit with Night Bitch. This is not uncommon for me. I refuse to read the synopsis of a book if I've heard about it, because I don't want to know any more than I need to. If I think I'll enjoy it, I just go for it. This is one of those where it was a little bit iffy if I knew exactly what it was going to be about, but it seemed, you know, kind of a psychological, deep, not horror, but maybe horror elements of literary fiction, which is a genre I really enjoy. I love a short, weird book, and that's kind of what I thought this would be. And really what this was is basically 3 short stories, where the first one is what is described on the back. So I enjoyed that story very much, and it's not marketed as short stories, I'm just interpreting it as short stories. And then it kind of got weird, which I'm not opposed to. It wasn't going where I thought it was gonna go. I ended up giving it a 3.5 star. I really enjoyed the writing. I bought another book by Han Kang to read that is more highly rated, which I think I will really enjoy. Overall, I think it was a short, weird book, but it wasn't really what I was expecting, and it didn't really go anywhere, and it was a little bit dense towards the end. So I bought it. I read it right away, which is something I haven't done in so long, but I don't need to bring it back to Albuquerque with me. In a similar vein, something that I got here and read here was Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I will just say, if you look at the kind of, like, I don't read a specific genre. Like, look at this. It's crazy. And it gets stranger. My cousin originally pre-ordered this. She waited a little while to read it, and I was like, I want to read that, I want to read that. So she finally read it while I was here. She gave it 3 stars, and her rating for that was kind of, she likes a romance where there's a bigger subplot or there's more going on than just the romance. That doesn't really bother me. I ended up reading this book on my road trip, and I really, really enjoyed it, especially the beginning. I gave it a 3.75 star, and to be fair, I haven't had to do a 0.25 or 0.75 for a rating at all this year until this book. The first 70% of this book was perfect, swoon-worthy. I get it. My first hockey romance, which seems to be kind of the craze in romance these days, and I get it. But for me, it was too long, and I read a lot of reviews that said the same thing. This book is too long, and it kind of goes through different phases because the romance happens pretty early, which is not something I'm opposed to. I like that, actually, to see how the romance grows. I'm not a slow burn girly, which is why I've waited so long to read Pride and Prejudice. And I really didn't like the epilogue. I don't want to put spoilers in here, but it just didn't seem like what she wanted. I'll say it like that. Actually, I know it's not what she wanted because she said it's not what she wanted, and that bothers me. So I think that's kind of where the 0.25 star went. Like, if it was just a little bit slow and a little bit too long, then whatever. I liked the plot, I liked the big moments, I liked the fights, whatever, I enjoyed it. And it's a spicy book, and that was good. I disagree with the reviews that said it was too spicy. That doesn't bother me. I relish in that, but it just was cute. I got it. Like, we could have a 300-page version, and that would be fine too. Now maybe what I'm most excited to unhaul, not because I didn't like it, but because it meant that I finally got to the point where I have finished this series, is my box set of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I didn't buy the box set, obviously I don't have the box, but I did collect these editions from various thrift stores and little free libraries, all in this edition, which is not hard to find. I just wanted it to match. I have finally finished Percy Jackson and the Olympians. When I came here at the beginning of June, I had not read the 4th or the 5th book. I read the first book sometime last year, the second book the same, the third book in maybe April of this year. So I just had to read the last 2. Battle of the Labyrinth, I think I gave 3 stars. I was getting kind of tired of the formula. I get it. I'm 22. I like high fantasy. These are middle grade lore fantasy, just kind of for fun. But I was getting tired of the formula, and this book was basically just these 3, the first 3, but with different characters, and I wasn't enjoying that. I knew what to expect, I knew what would happen. Like, even if I didn't know who they were going to run into, I knew what would happen. The Last Olympian did not follow the formula, and I think, well, it was predictable in terms of what choices the characters would make when faced with some big grand choice. Well, it was kind of predictable what would happen when the moment came. I didn't know where this book was going. It wasn't following this same quest formula. I enjoyed this a lot. I think I gave this 4 stars. I am going to donate them all together. I think I'll wrap a little ribbon around them and put them at a little free library by my house. I'm also Unhauling, I'm glad my mom died, but that's just because I borrowed it and I read it and I gave it 4.5 stars. Really, really enjoyed this memoir as much as you can. Like, the reading experience was very good. I wouldn't say I was, super happy all the time while I was reading it, of course, but really, really well done book. I just borrowed it from my sister, and before I go, I'm gonna return it to her. So that's it for now. The first is Joyland by Stephen King. I really wanted to love this because I loved Under the Dome by Stephen King so much, and this was only my second book from him. And while this book had really great vibes, it's about a boy who kind of starts working at this North Carolina summer amusement park, and him following this ghost story. This book had really strange pacing, and it seemed like kind of two book ideas pasted together, because there was also this subplot of this disabled child who befriends the narrator and they try to solve this ghost story. It was just kind of strange. I loved the vibes, very summertime, but overall just like a meh read. As much as I love this cover, I don't need this book. I need this woman to write more thrillers, because I keep reading her books, because the first one I read was Verity, and it was a perfect book, even though it's messed up and strange. This was just another fine book. I think this is too sad. Like, no one needs to write a book this sad for it to be impactful, and a lot of the time nothing was happening. This book doesn't have much of a plot. I just also kind of felt fine about Ugly Love. Okay, this book I actively hate. This is Versus Death Noises by Marcus Pachter, and you've probably never heard of this because I picked it up off of a table at my college, and it's a book of short stories. I love this imagery of the ear. I'm hard of hearing, so everything ear-related always is, like, gonna intrigue me. This book was fine. The way I described it in my Storygraph review was, like, when you're in a dream and everything just, like, makes sense, you're going along, yeah, whatever, the weirdest thing could happen, but, like, sure, yeah, that works. That's how it felt reading these stories, and then it'd be over, and I was like, I actually have no idea what happened. That doesn't make any sense. And then it went Oedipal. Like, genuinely Oedipal, and I think that we should stop writing that. As an author, you can write anything you want. And that's what I have to remind myself as a reader, is you can write anything you want. You didn't have to write this. You didn't have to write this, Marcus, and I wish I hadn't read it. So that got 1 star for me. Then I have Weather by Jenny O'Fill, and this has been on my TBR the longest, or maybe, like, there's, like, 3 books out there that I bought at the same time, but this has been on there for a while, and I don't know why I didn't read it, because it's very easy to read, but this book really disappointed me. I think it's in kind of this, cryptic woman, or, like, unhinged woman genre, about a mom who starts writing kind of like an advice column, or like a Q&A for her boss, and it's quite existential. It's lots of comments on climate change, and while I do think that this book had some great insight and some great comments about the state of our world, it had nothing going on really in the background, and it was going to be a 3-star read for me until our narrator started cheating on her husband, and that is always going to piss me off. I am never a fan of that. As a reader, I don't want to read about cheating. Like, there's nothing interesting about that. Like, if I'm supposed to like you and you're cheating, I'm not going to like you. So overall, this book was a chore to finish, and I gave it 2 stars. I don't need to keep it. Is this controversial? Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I gave this 3.5 stars. I thought it was fine. I really liked the first half of this book. Essentially, you have Olive McRiva, who is one of Evelyn Hugo's husbands. Evelyn's husbands. The 7 Evelyn husbands of Evelyn Malibu. Oh my god. Anyway, you essentially have all of McRiva's children, and they are throwing this big summer blowout, but it's ominous from the beginning. You know it's not going to go right. In the first half of this book, you have really an insight into their childhood and how they were raised and going back and forth between them on the day of the party and them growing up. And that part was really interesting. The second half is basically just the party happening. And there are too many cameos of celebrities, except these are all fake celebrities, so we don't really care about them. We don't really know them. There's an extra character who's added in the end where you're like, what? Why do we need to do that? The confrontation scenes didn't feel genuine to me. While this had great summer vibes, and I really did like the first part, this is not my favorite from her, and I just don't need it. If you're asking what my favorite is, it is Daisy Jones. I have The Stranger by Albert Camus. This is a translated French, very short classic that I read on a plane because I bought it for 25 cents at the public library. And I actually really enjoyed this. You have a man who accidentally commits a murder, and he doesn't mean it, but he also doesn't care because he's quite numb to everything. And you have the first half is that everything leading up to that event, and then the second half is his court trial. And I like reading about trials, like a court scene. I always have. That's why I really like Where the Crawdads Sing, why I really liked Our Kind of Cruelty. I just find that setting really interesting. And it's just about what's going on in his head and his kind of existential, I wouldn't even call it a crisis, just like existentialism and what do we owe each other in terms of our emotional capacities and what does society tell us about how we're supposed to act in certain situations. I actually really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. It's not something that I need to keep, and it's kind of heavily annotated by someone who is not me, so I don't need to keep it. Alright, a very disappointing book was Staten Island by Tom McCarthy, which has probably my favorite cover of all of these and even of probably the books I own. I just love this cover. It's got deckled edges. It's just kind of like a short, weird book about this anthropologist writing what his boss deems the Great Report. However, we never really learn what that means. And at first we have these really cool comments on the human condition because our narrator is an anthropologist. But eventually the book kind of it goes nowhere. It goes nowhere, and then we have this, like, really weird confession from his, like, girlfriend, and this book was, like, just fine. It was also a chore to finish, even though it's not long and the font is big. Just not a book that I need to keep as it sits there and reminds me of how disappointing it was. Okay, next I have 2 books that I actually really did enjoy, and I annotated quite a bit, as you'll see, but just something about them, I don't need to keep them. I don't think I'll reread them, and they just aren't like sticking with me the way that some other books are. The first is Push by Sapphire. I mentioned in my haul that I really thought I was going to read The Push by Ashley Audrain, which was about a haunted baby, and this was really not about that. This is about a girl who is sexually assaulted by her father, following her life as she is pregnant with his second child and her trying to get an education. And while this is a really powerful story, it was also incredibly sad, and it's an important book, but not a book that I want to look over on my shelves and see. If that makes any sense, I just think while it was very powerful and had brilliant writing and some brilliant storytelling techniques, it's not a book that I think I want to hold on to. Similarly is Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. I read this book because our main character is a neuroscience PhD student, which is the field that I'm going into, and it follows her struggling with her son's death as a result of overdose and how that kind of ties into her research interests. This book also, while powerful in its storytelling, really lacked in the sense of the research element was not fully fleshed out, and as someone from that background, I can't overlook it. I wish that I could for the sake of this story, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I think it was a beautiful, beautiful book. Also incredibly sad, and just irks me a little when I think about those nuances that that come from my background. I can't help it, and so I'm just gonna pass this on to another person who can read it and enjoy it. Alright, up on my favorite shelf I have The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, and for Christmas a couple years ago I got Joy at Work, which is her other book, written with Scott Sonnenschein, who's like a business executive. This book was just fine. I don't think it really needed to exist. It's just kind of about organizing your professional life, and if you've read if you've read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, I don't think you need to read Joy at Work because you can just apply what you learn there here. And that's basically all they're saying, and so I found this book kind of underwhelming. Alright, I am decluttering the first volume of a Twilight graphic novel only because I bought 2 copies. My eBay order refused to show up on the website, so I thought it was canceled, and then it showed up at my doorstep after I had bought another one at a used bookstore, so now I have 2. Another book that I enjoyed was Book Lovers by Emily Henry, but I feel fine about Emily Henry. I know that she is kind of BookTube's baby, but I feel fine about her books. I usually enjoy them. I didn't really like Happy Place, but I don't need to own this. I'm never going to reread it. It's fine. It's a fine book. A nonfiction book that I read is Greedy, Notes from a Bisexual Who Wants Too Much, which was gifted to me on my birthday last year from my sister, and it's just kind of a woman coming to touch with her sexuality and what it means and how she interacts with people and kind of her first experiences. I think this book is good. I remember enjoying it as I read it. There wasn't really a message from here that I took away from it or anything that I really remember from reading it. I do remember it felt a little bit white savior-ish, although I would love to hear from someone who is not white their opinion about that, but just clearly someone told her to do her research, and so she kind of embedded it into her essays every so often. I don't really need to hold on to this, and I enjoyed it when I read it, but I don't need to keep it. Okay. I mentioned to you that I tend to like a weird book. So I read Snuff by Chuck Palahniuk, however you say his name. This book is just gross and Oedipal. I can't say any more than that. I read the whole book. I think it has a cool cover, but I don't need to keep it. Another disappointing read is How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, and I think that this book really lacked a central argument and lacked direction and just was a case study of different people's views on attention and what it means to pay attention to something, as opposed to how to actively clear your mind and be okay with understimulation, which is what I thought it was going to be. I just thought this book was largely fine, and yeah. And the last book is In the Woods by Tana French. This is about a detective and his case where he was involved in a murder as a child, or at least a missing persons case. His friends went missing, but there was blood, so you never know what happened to them. And in the same town, around the same time of year, quite a bit later, I think it's 30 years in the future, another girl has turned up dead. I really liked the writing of this book, and I liked the way that the story kind of unfolded, but I found the mystery plot kind of underwhelming, and you never do find out what happened in the 30 years past version. So I just thought this was largely fine, and I think that the rest of the series, which is called the Dublin Murder Squad, sounded interesting, but this one in particular just didn't wow me, and so it's gotta go. Alright, so that is 25 books that are off of my shelf and going out into the world. I always feel good decluttering and getting rid of things that I just don't love or just didn't work for me. So that's the end of this. I hope you enjoyed my unhaul, and I hope that you go and read a book and get rid of it. Alright, love you, bye!